One of the things that sometimes happens to people when they grow in their religious journey is they suffer from something called burnout, which is that they try to take on so much, they're so conscious about trying to do the right thing, to be pleasing in God's eyes, to get all their mitzvot, the laws, done exactly in the right way, and eventually they burn out. I wanted to talk about this a little bit and see what are the roots of what causes someone to burn out, because surely whatever life God would ask of us, it wouldn't be something that would lead to such psychological damage and distress as burnout. So what's going wrong when this happens to people? One of the revolutionary transformations that came through Hasidut, first really articulated in written form, I think, in the Tanya, which was written by the Alter Rebbe some few hundred years ago. He said, stop trying to be a Tzadik. Stop trying to be righteous. A Tzadik really means perfectly righteous. Stop trying to do that. And that is the source of so much of your sadness, depression, and burnout. Because you're thinking that you've got to be the next Moshe Rabbeinu, the next Moses. And that's just not realistic for many reasons, most of which are actually entirely out of your control. But he says more than that, it's not actually your purpose. It's not even what God is expecting or wants from you. So let's unpack this a little bit. You know, one of the things that I struggled to make sense of for a while is this idea of something called in Hebrew Yeridat Hadorot. The idea that as we go from generation to generation, we become further and further away from Mount Sinai, so we're less and less connected to the source of it all. And so we descend spiritually, but yet at the same time, we're getting closer and closer to Moshiach and building that perfect world. How can that be that in each generation humanity is descending spiritually, and yet at the same time we're getting closer and closer to that perfect world? Doesn't really seem to make sense. Now, one of the things that I've heard rabbis say in the past is, they say, yes, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and therefore the cup is nearly full. And so we've only got to do that little bit more. We're much less great, but we've only just got to do that little bit more to fill the cup entirely. I mean, I think I heard one rabbi saying, you know, Moshiach will come about, that perfect world will come about just from that sort of last, final, pathetic plea to God in sincere and heartfelt prayer. But the question is, I get that, that makes sense logically, but how have we ended up at this perfect world when we're still descending spiritually? Yes, it's taking less effort to get to the final hurdles, but we're still descending spiritually. So how does this make sense? The Tanya talks about why God created the world. And he picks up on writing in the Midrash, a biblical commentary on Parshat Naso, a reading of the Torah, that says that God created the world because he desired to have a home in the lowest world. This is the lowest world. What makes it the lowest world is the fact that we can choose to ignore God. We can deny that God exists. A world lower than that would be a world where we can't even conceive of what God is, or not even aware, and there'd be no point to that because then there's no opportunity for a relationship. But God creates the lowest possible world. It's a world that Adam and Eve consciously went into, this tree of knowledge of good and evil, this world of good and evil and mortality, and they went into it where they'd be as detached as possible from God, but still with the opportunity and potential to connect him and choose him, in order to really choose that relationship with him. So God desires a dwelling place in the lowest world because it's in that lowest world where mankind has the opportunity to choose him most freely and consciously build a world in which godliness and God's values are present. And it's a real partnership, right? If this was a world that was deeply connected to God from the get-go, if this was a Garden of Eden from the start, right, then there wouldn't be much free choice on our part, and God's seeking a deep, real relationship. That's why he wants that dwelling place in the lowest world, because it's a world in which humanity has chosen him most willingly and freely. So, if that's the case, we can start to understand why it is that we actually descend spiritually in each generation, but actually in some ways we're getting closer and closer to the Messianic era. Yes, our forefathers were more righteous in many senses than we are, but they also had far greater sense of connection to Mount Sinai, to spirituality. You know, they had, in the times of the prophets, there was far more awareness of God, and even later on there was more Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, more of that connection. And so the further away we get, yes, we are descending spiritually, but think about what that comment in the Tanya said. God desires a dwelling place in the lowest world, so we're descending spiritually, but every time we're choosing to make those small sacrifices for him, just fight off that urge, that negative urge from, just from time to time, not to become a perfectly righteous person, because that's just not realistic, but just to have some small wins in our daily battles, in our daily life. Those are equally precious to God as the actions of the righteous, because he's not expecting us in a world that's so spiritually declined and fallen and disconnected from Mount Sinai. He's not expecting us to suddenly become a Moshe or a King David. But he is expecting us, or hoping, that we will just at our own level be able to just make that next step, that next push forward, have those small daily wins. And when you understand that, you no longer feel the need to become the most righteous and perfect and learned person there is, otherwise you haven't really made it. And unfortunately this occurs a lot in religious communities, where people say the ideal is you have to be the Gadol Hador in your learning, you have to be the most, in every single sense of religiosity, the most perfect. But that's the revolution of what Hasidic thought brought to us. That actually, stop trying to be righteous, because that's not even what God wants of you. He didn't design you for you to be this, and you are burning out trying to be fully righteous and as machmir and as stringent as possible, because that's not who you're designed to be. The Tanya talks about how actually what we're designed to be is, or what we should struggle to be, is to be at something called a Beinoni, which means we have daily battles. We're pulled in two directions. And every time we have one of those small wins, sometimes big wins, but just every time we're able to just shut down that negative thought, to fight that little bit of laziness, to have that extra bit of concentration when praying, to do that extra chore for our parents or friends, whatever. Those small things are the things that are so precious to God. And the small things are the big things. So the Tanya actually talks, and I want to quote a little bit of what it says here to show it to you that I'm not just making this up. It's actually what the text says. It says the root of so much religious depression and sadness is thinking you've got to be perfect, and that's the only way you'll make it. But it's saying, no, every single moment is a new opportunity. You messed up yesterday, you messed up an hour ago, doesn't matter. Every time you keep pushing forward and keep striving just to do that little bit more, and or even to avoid doing something that's not God's preference. This is what life is all about, and this is what you're here for. This is your mission, this is your purpose, and it's what God wants and treasures. Listen to what it says. It says such sadness, this religious sadness that we're talking about, is due to conceit, in that he does not recognize his position. He is sad in his heart because he has not attained the rank of a Tzadik, inasmuch as the righteous are certainly not troubled by such foolish thoughts. But had he recognized his station, that he's very far from the rank of Tzadik, and would that he could just be a Beinoni and not a wicked person, even for a single moment throughout his life, then surely this is the quality of the intermediates in their service, just to subdue your evil impulse and thoughts rising from the heart to the brain, and to avert the mind therefrom, thrusting the temptation away from both hands. That's what it's all about, he's saying. And with every thrust, with every single small effort you put in, even if you screwed up before and you might screw up again in the future, Every time you just have that little bit of energy, he says, he has expelled expelled negative forces, not just in his own mind, but even on higher spiritual realms, right? It has a huge effect the world over. Therefore, no person should feel depressed, nor should his heart become exceedingly troubled, even though he be engaged all days in this conflict. For perhaps of this was he created, and this is his service, to constantly subdue what it calls the sitra achra, these negative forces within him. For there are two kinds of gratifications before God, right? It's saying that this is something God treasures. There's one from the complete annihilation of negativity, which is achieved by Tzadikim, but then it says there's also one where a pleasure that God experiences when he sees people just subduing that negative voice and a negative temptation, just from their day-to-day lives. And he says that it's like, for God, it's like two different types of delicacies: the delicacy of a Tzadik, of a fully righteous person, and then a delicacy of a Beinoni, someone who's just struggling every day with an evil inclination and overcomes it. And then in the final paragraph of this chapter, it's chapter 27 in the Tanya, it talks about how actually just by making those small steps, having those small wins, God actually gives us strength and power to overcome the greater challenges and negativity within us. So this is a real paradigm shift. And this means that everyone, whatever station they're at in life, whatever circumstances they have, whatever their free will battles are, because some people, their free will battle is just not to steal from a store one day, right? Whereas for other people, it's having that bit more concentration in their prayer. But the idea is that all that matters, whatever station you're at in life, just putting in that extra bit of effort to overcome your negative impulses. Every time you do that, it gives infinite pleasure and nachas to God. And it's infinitely meaningful. And it's not like, well, you didn't have any wins or do particularly well one day, that rules out everything you did previously or in the future. Absolutely not. So this principle, if people really absorbed it, it would change their approach to their Judaism, and it would really stamp out burnout and negativity, because the aim is no longer to be the best to be the Moshe Rabbeinu. It's just to be the best ourselves. And that doesn't mean being the greatest Tzadik of all time. It means being you and having those daily wins. It's also about fulfilling, not just focusing on the negative things that you're trying to avoid, but pursuing the positive traits and skills and using those to contribute to the world and to your Judaism and service of others in a positive way. Those are all other examples in which we are fulfilling our purpose. And therefore, when you understand it from this perspective, and you understand that every small win is infinitely valuable and eternally valuable, then it changes things on a practical level as well. I once heard Rabbi Manis Friedman talking about how he spoke to someone that was close to someone who committed suicide. And this person said, I think this person committed suicide in their middle ages, maybe in their late 30s. And they said, what a wasted life. What a wasted life this was. So much potential he had in the future. And Rabbi Friedman says, that's really not just not nice, but it's not an appropriate thing to say or accurate thing to say. Because think about it. We know that this person, for at least the last 6 years before he committed suicide, was struggling with suicidal thoughts. For 6 years! On a daily basis, on an hourly basis, he was fighting those thoughts, and he won. And after 6 years, it just became too much for him. That's not a wasted life. Yes, it's a tragedy he's not here anymore. But to think that his resilience through all that time means it was a wasted life? No, far from it. And what the Tanya is trying to say about the spiritual implications of these small wins is that he actually, every time he fought this battle, these suicidal thoughts, he actually made these negative voices, these negative impulses, a little bit less intense for everyone in the world. Because the Tanya teaches that when we overcome some of our impulses that aren't ours but were placed within us as a challenge, when we overcome them, it actually affects the entire world's experience of these negative temptations and lifts up the whole world. So it wasn't a wasted life at all. He struggled and was resilient for a very long time. And every time he fought back and even was just sometimes passive and just wait for it to pass, he did immeasurable good, infinite good, that has helped build this world and make it closer to what God desires. Another example about why this paradigm shift is so important. Let's say you have someone, either a man or a woman, who has been married for 10 years with kids, and one of them suddenly becomes a lot more religious. Let's say they weren't observant growing up, and one of them becomes more observant. They think, right, well, I guess I've got to leave my family and go off somewhere else and marry someone who is equally observant to me. No. God places you in the position you're in the place you're at in life, with the people around you that you are surrounded by, because that's where he needs you to be. And so, if you want to be more observant, be more observant. But find a way to make it work within your family, because that's where God wants you to be. Stop trying to be Moshe Rabbeinu. Be you. And if anything, be a light to others who maybe aren't seeing as much light or feeling it as much. It all comes from what the Tanya says, not my words, the Tanya words, a conceited notion of needing to be a perfect saint. No. Where God is to be found and where he wants you to be is exactly where he placed you. And it shouldn't be about us, therefore. It should be about what he wants. I just want to finish with a quote from Harry Potter, one of my favourite series. And someone mentioned it to me the other day, and it really taps into this concept that we've been talking about. This idea that we're not here to become Tzadikim, we're here to grapple with forces pulling us in either direction and choosing when and where we can to do what's right. This is what it says in Harry Potter. It's a quote from Sirius Black, Harry's godfather. He says, "We've all got both light and dark inside of us. What matters is the part that we choose to act on, and that is who we really are." I'm Ollie Annisfeld, and you're watching JTV.